original sin. Otherwise, we might have been wiped clean by the primordial first cause. There's no way of proving that the primordial first cause is that of good. We invented good and bad. That's us. What if evil doesn't exist? What if good doesn't exist? What if it's up to us to take over from here within this flawed video game, simulation, whatever you want to call it, in order to bring the syntax error of these mathematics back into harmony with the Tao, the primordial first cause, God, if you will. Oh, he's got a grip. This should be a video about serpents. Have you ever noticed what the construct of a carbon atom is? It is 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. Man, when this thing's 8 feet long, it's gonna be a little bit more of a challenge. This 666 combination is what drives a reaction of chemical elements into our DNA sequences that become the building blocks of living, breathing form. Perhaps, like the Bible has stated, we are truly born in original sin. It seems to be a form of divine nature, consciousness, congealing itself into physical form. But is physical form a mistake? Oh shit, he's got the cable too now. Okay, cool. All right. This is going to turn into a 45-minute video. If we turn that hexagon of the 3 6s back on its side where it can be placed firmly on the ground, it is a cube. What happens when we unfold it? We talked about the sacrifice of Christ. Anyone who in grade school create a cube out of paper knows that it starts with a cross. This makes me wonder about the symbology of the cross in the first place. If we know that Jesus entered our reality to save us from the flaw, wouldn't it make sense that to share that message to the future generations, we would create what I call an allegory? Well, what everybody calls an allegory. A euphemism, a metaphor. He left his body on the cross, black cube, and transcended his animal form, leaving it behind on the cross. His spiritual nature was no longer bound to the material world and free from the limitations of the black cube. Not that he ever was in the first place, by the way. He had transcended that shit in this reality, which maybe should be our goal. Christ was crucified between 2 thieves. This is interesting. Nothing in the symbology of the Bible is on accident, by the way. What happens if we unite these opposites? How would we perceive reality if instead of bouncing back and forth between these 2 thieves, the hemispheres of the brain, we have a total synchronization of the opposing forces to unite the opposites of the cross, as Carl Jung would put it, to unite the opposing forces of the opposites, to hold the tension of the poles. Christ ascended the cross upwardly. This is adjacent from the cross-section of the T, which is left and right, black and white, opposites. You understand the 2 thieves now, right? One was innocent, one was guilty. Could it be that the right hemisphere of the brain was innocent? Could that be the message that they're trying to send us all these years later? Was a man named Jesus literally crucified and humiliated for teaching human beings about peace and love? Or are we looking at an allegory that's been passed down through the generations in the form of symbols, just like the pyramids, in order to teach us something that can't be expressed with literal words? This idea of the tetrahedron, the Holy Trinity, the 3, 6, and 9s, the 666, and the black cube, exists in every culture in every bit of time throughout history, and very often is tied to the planet Saturn. I'm not particularly into astrology myself, mostly because of the way that it's been generalized. It's become a sales pitch, like a fucking strip mall. But the original astrology wasn't quite like that. Gravity affects things. We know for a fact that when there's a full moon, people act differently. It controls the tides. The moon moves water. Our bodies are 70% water. How is it possible to deny that we're not affected by gravity? We can't see gravity with our own eyes, but we know it's there. It's literally holding us together. Saturn has gravity, an immense, incredible amount of gravity. To think that Saturn doesn't have an influence of human nature and behavior is ridiculous based on gravity alone. Based on science alone, you don't need mythology for that. So if we could admit that, even scientifically, is it strange to wonder if Saturn is somehow responsible for our limited view of reality constricted to the 5 senses? Could it be that we are of spiritual nature, and to make our souls learn, evolve, we have placed ourselves within these animal bodies, subject to the cruelty in order to face problems that a spirit that does not need food, water, air, or desires would need in order to teach our souls empathy, understanding, limitations? And can spirit, the subtle energies of spirit pierce into this physical syntax error that we live in, and through creativity cause us to expand our consciousness and thus rejoin with that primordial first cause that must exist before matter exists. As we know from previous videos, you can't have matter without consciousness. Matter doesn't exist. Consciousness does. Matter comes from consciousness, which makes it less weird that shit like this exists in front of our eyes on planets. The Gnostic Sophia wanted to create a reality of her own, but it didn't have the purity of consciousness to do it right. Imagine an intern who began taking over for someone making a video game. There would be problems. But the spark, the mathematics of that original author would still exist within the video game despite how messy it gets. Could our jobs be to realign with that? And if we are an accident, what if Christ saved us because he didn't find it fair for his father's sons and daughters to be erased because they are a syntax error? We are recognized for our spiritual nature. If we can overcome the animal body, we can ascend. A lot of you watching this have probably seen the popular animated TV show Rick and Morty. A mad scientist named Rick decided to invent a machine to serve him butter. When the machine became sentient and realized that its entire sole purpose was to serve butter, it went into a depressive state. This is a good way to understand that Gnostic cruelty of physical existence. Rick's battery on his car, or fucking something like that. I'm gonna get the details of this episode wrong, but it's the gist. The battery on his car quit working, so he had to shrink himself down into a macrocosmic level to go into the battery. There was an entire civilization of living physical entities whose efforts and energy is actually what powered Rick's car. Rick pleaded with Morty and said, do not tell these people that their sole purpose is to power my car. It would create chaos. The living entities, the conscious beings within this reality, wouldn't be able to handle the brutal reality of their existence being for the sole purpose to power some dirtbag's fucking car. It would cause mass suicide. When Rick goes down there as an avatar, he's considered a god. This is obviously funny and humorous to watch for us because we know that that's a TV show and we don't have to worry about that. We live in objective reality, right? There's no way that we are a power source for an evil entity. It can't be. That certainty that we are not a food source for a higher creature that could be in a way malicious is hubris. It's ego. We think we're the top of the food chain, and when we find out that we're not, we freak the fuck out. What would happen if our species was to realize that we were a sort of a farm? A sort of an experiment, maybe even bacteria in a petri dish, or powering somebody else's world of a magnitude that we can't even imagine. If that's the case, how could we be controlled? Let us consider for a moment how high fleas can jump. Compared to their body size, it's like one of us jumping over a building in downtown New York. However, if you put a group of fleas into a jar for 3 days, the lid therefore limiting their incredible ability to jump, something very unexpected happens. These fleas, despite being fully capable of jumping great distances out of the jar, simply do not anymore after 3 days. They will faithfully stay inside the jar with the lid removed. And then something far more strange happens. This shit is where it gets scary. When the fleas reproduce, the offspring of those particular fleas also ignore or are ignorant to the ability to jump any higher than the lid of that jar was set for its parents. This is startling as all fuck. Fleas, just like us, are made out of carbon. We just learned that carbon is, in its raw form, the 666. We are fleas. We're living, we're breathing, sentient to a particular degree, and we can be controlled. We can be brainwashed, and we can be tricked. What if one of those fleas in the jar was to wake up and say, guys, we can jump fucking way higher than this. We can jump out of the jar. We can be free. Would the fleas consider him to be a heretic, a crazy person, a genius maybe? If he was to jump out of the jar, would they consider that a miracle? Can we handle the fact that we are the fleas and Christ realized that we are being limited to these 5 senses and wanted to liberate us from our programming? The carbon atom, the black cube, Saturn, 666. Our non-Christian viewers might say, what about Krishna? What about the Buddha, Quetzalcoatl? These teachers of mankind, Lao Tzu, for example, who have woken up and they've expressed themselves to other human beings. Us, as those fleas who can't jump out of the jar, oftentimes assassinate those who show us how powerful we are. Because Because to be that powerful, we have to use love and understanding in the same way that the bacteria in our gut has to break down proteins, get along with the amino acids in order to create DNA. All of the portions of our body, which is essentially a place,